Hey, Mark here, and we're continuing in our study of residual energy and haunts. And this is going to be actually a second one that I do on thermodynamics. I decided I wanted to do an additional one. Um, there's several reasons for that. I won't really bore you with those. Let me just the things I wanted to add. A couple personal things about myself is that I'm ignorant of a lot of things, but from my background, I do have a considerable amount of study in theology. I did 3 years of graduate work in that, Master's of Divinity, and then taught logic. So those two things combined have been a real joy. Um, a blessing and a curse in a sense because I can smell a bad argument or reasoning a mile away or bad theology. And when I first heard about residual energy, it kind of stunk, both from a logical and certainly from a biblical perspective and scientific as well. That was 10 years ago. And I mentioned it in my book, which came out 8 years ago. I didn't know anything about it. I looked for information. I couldn't find any pro or con. There was tons of anecdotal evidence. And if you, for example, if you looked on the shows, you would see it mentioned all the time. And then in my book, I mentioned that television shows a lot. But since then, I have a lot of water has gone under the bridge, and I have about 100 cases under my belt as far as cleansing houses and people of demonic spirits. So it's not so just theoretical anymore. I've really seen how true to life the Bible is when it comes to this area of the supernatural. Now, I wanted to say this by way of introduction too, that there's two ways of dealing with the relationship between evidence and belief. And we can either let the evidence lead us to what we believe, or we could be already wed to a belief and then search for evidence to support or buttress what we already want to believe. And I'm convinced that many folks who do believe in residual energy are quite wed to it. In fact, to the point where they are men and women on a mission trying to find evidence for a belief that they are wed to. But I'm hoping that this will challenge folks to think through that the logical way to pursue this or any subject is to look at the evidence and see where it leads to. And by the time we're finished, we're going to see that the foundation for residual energy is going to be demolished. Those are strong terms, but there's a lot at stake. And my heart is full with emotion because I want to tell you straight up, I've seen this, is that investigators have told their clients that, well, let me back up. When clients call people in to help them, they're concerned because there's something happening. They have a healthy concern or worry about their welfare. But when investigators come in and tell them that they don't have anything to worry about because it's just residual energy, they are being given a false sense of security. So they're in a worse state than they were before, because at least before they had a legitimate, healthy concern about what was going on. And in fact, some people will even tell them and congratulate them because they're in a living museum, so to speak. So this is not just I don't know, for some reason, folks just have not dealt with this, either pro or con, in the 10 years since then. And I say this humbly, but for some reason, God has laid this ball on my lap, so to speak, as far as the only person that I know of in the world that who is dealing with this comprehensively, critiquing it, and it needs to be critiqued. I'm going to jump right in instead of dealing with the 5 other red flags that I had mentioned in another segment on this topic. I'm just going to jump right into the meat of what we're dealing with tonight and the main problem with the theory of residual energy. And again, by the time we are finished, that theory is going to be debunked, demolished, destroyed. And it needs to be, because it's destroying people. It's an utterly foolish notion. So, I want to focus on the concept of residual energy as contradictory to science. You see, y'all, there's general revelation and there's special revelation. General revelation is how God reveals himself through nature, and special revelation is how he reveals himself through his word. And particularly, I want to focus on the laws of thermodynamics with reference to how that expresses the laws of God and nature. So this will be an argument from science and not explicitly from the Bible, but all truth is God's truth, and the laws of science are God's laws. And as we'll see, I really believe only a non-biblical worldview could give rise to a notion like residual energy that gives energy such a central role in explaining reality. That I am appealing to thermodynamics may surprise some of you, because oftentimes folks will appeal to the first law of thermodynamics, the law of energy conservation, in support of either intelligent ghosts or residual haunts. And the argument goes something like this. Since energy cannot be created or destroyed, then when people die or there's a traumatic event dispersing emotional energy, their energy has to go somewhere, right? Well, with what I consider several steps of logic missing in between, the conclusion is then made that this provides a scientific basis for intelligent and residual haunts. Now, regarding residual haunts, it is stated that the first law, conservation, also can explain why these alleged non-intelligent haunts can morph and move so remarkably. It is simply energy changing its form based on certain cues. However, I remind you, there are 3 laws of thermodynamics, or 4, some people would say, but 3 that are applicable most to us. Consider what would happen if you took a glass of water like this, right? And if you put food coloring in it and found out what happened. So let's do that. Glass of water right here, green food coloring, put just 1 drop in, I suppose. Okay, it's in there. I'm going to set it down right next to me carefully so I don't upend it with my uncoordinated self. And in a couple of minutes, when we come back to it, as I'm looking at it with my eye, I can already see it's halfway dispersed through the glass. I'll lift it up very gently. Can you see how quickly it's already dispersing through the glass? We'll give it just a couple more minutes, and it'll be. You'll see what will happen, and it's intended as an illustration of the second and third laws of thermodynamics, where there is the diffusion of energy when it is emitted from its container. All right, so this dispersion will continue until the green food coloring has reached equilibrium. It has been evenly distributed through the container, the glass. In the end, you'll have light green water evenly distributed throughout the glass. Again, all this occurs without shaking or stirring it. Now again, all this is just to illustrate the point, the main point I want to make tonight and that is the second and third laws of thermodynamics, and why residual energy flies in the face of these absolute laws of science, and why residual energy cannot be true because of this. Okay, so in like fashion, like the water and the drop in it, in like fashion, consider what happens when someone dies or there is a traumatic event. When energy has been released from its container, whether it's bioelectric energy from a human body or alleged emotional psychic trauma energy, I say alleged because I'm not so sure there's such thing as emotional energy. We'll talk about it in another segment. Then it will begin to disperse immediately until it has reached equilibrium in the surrounding environment. Though the energy has not been destroyed, that's the first law, it has been very significantly watered down due to this energy being widely distributed or diffused in the environment. In this case, the atmosphere. Atmosphere 100 miles up, surrounding the Earth, that's a pretty big glass. Pretty big container for energy to be diffused into. And so hence, once it's so watered down, it is rendered unusable because the energy has been reduced veritably to nothing. It has not been destroyed, but it is nothing in the sense that it's become entirely dispersed into the surrounding atmosphere. It being the energy emitted from the person or the traumatic event. It is so thoroughly watered down that it retains none of its original distinctive features or potential energy. Now let's take a look at this glass now. I'm holding it as I can. Do you see that? Do you see how light green water it is? Alright. It's still dispersing a little bit, but you can tell that it has, the entire glass has pretty much reached equilibrium. The point being is that when I drop the water into the container, it then diffused, and then it is now reaching equilibrium, the second and the third laws. And that is illustrating, again, the second and third laws of thermodynamics, that when energy is released from the body, that the container that it's in is infinitely bigger. It's the environment. Okay, I'm sitting in a room right now, but if you were to die outside or wherever, the energy that's emitted would just be it would just be, so, like I said, so watered down by the environment or the atmosphere, it would be rendered unusable. So there is a Latin phrase, ex nihilo nihil fit, from nothing nothing comes. And for nothing to cause something, it has to both be and not be at the same time in the same relationship. If there's no remaining energy due to entropy, then it cannot be the cause of anything, not to mention the elaborate demonstrations associated with residual haunts. No residual energy means no residual haunts. Because as we talked about last time, cause and effect. Residual energy is a cause for residual haunts. Just as it would be impossible for food coloring to stay clustered in the center of the glass, so it would be impossible for the released energy to remain clustered somewhere in the environment, as the notion of residual energy requires and assumes and states. Look, try to picture in your mind dropping this green food coloring in the middle of this glass right here, and right in the middle, try to imagine that one drop I put in there. Imagine it being hovering right in the middle, just clustered. Imagine I put 2 or 3 in there and just remain clustered, you know, in the middle. He said, dang, man, there's something wrong with either the water or the food coloring. Something's drunk. Something's wrong with that. Something's bizarre. So, the same thing should be seen, to me, pardon me for putting in these terms, but that is one drunk, bizarre theory, residual energy. It is just wobbly. It's lacking really in any common sense, but is just as bizarre as, trying to picture the food coloring clustering in the middle. Try to imagine energy being emitted from my or your body for either because of a traumatic event, and it being absorbed by the wall or the soil and just staying as a cluster of energy there. It can't, because as soon as it leaves our body, it's going to be watered down, and it's going to, by the way God has made the world, is going to move out into entropy and seeking equilibrium within the atmosphere. So again, so watered down because of the hugeness of this particular container that it would be rendered totally useless and virtually a non-entity, whatever there was originally. So let me move on. Again, it really would look bizarre if you were to look in that glass and it got clustered, but that's really what's at the heart of the residual energy theory, is the bizarre concept of energy clustering in an environment. It can't do that. According to, as we're going to see, the absolute laws of thermodynamics, the energy has to diffuse. It cannot cluster. Okay, it's vital to note at this point that the laws of thermodynamics are considered by scientists to be absolute. There are no known exceptions. None. Okay? The second law is considered to hold true across the board, as far in the third as well, regardless of circumstances. This is important to keep in mind, especially if one simply dismisses my argument by saying, well, the paranormal realm is full of mystery and energy acts differently in that realm. 1,000 different times, no. For a couple of reasons. That line of logic is known as special pleading in logic, and it's a logical fallacy. Secondly, besides, investigators say that residual energy or haunts is not a paranormal phenomenon anyway. It's a natural phenomenon. Hence, since it's a natural phenomenon, then it must follow the laws of nature. Also, energy is energy is energy is energy, right? So, paranormal investigators quantify paranormal energy all the time via EMF gauges, etc. So why question an absolute law of science at this juncture, in which it is said to be merely naturally caused energy? Okay, now consider this scenario. In my hometown, there was a bloody battle during the War for Independence, the Battle of Guilford Courthouse in 1781. That's also where I had my first paranormal experience. I saw a shadow figure decked out in the military garb of that time, and the normal person would think that it was a residual haunt, because that seems to be pretty common with reference to battlefields. And it being my first experience, I didn't really know what was going on, but I had the sense it was evil, and I looked it in the eyes. I rebuked it in the name of Jesus. It became very intelligent at that point, and it fled. Many people would have considered it residual, and it would have remained residual appearing had I not, it by faith, rebuked it in the name of Jesus. Many consider battlefields to be the classic example of the perfect conditions for the creation of residual energy and haunt. Why is that? Well, the violent and premature fashion in which these young men died is said to do two things. It violently and with high emotional tension releases the bioelectric energy of these young men as they die, and it creates emotional or psychic shock waves due to the violence involved. Memories are then imprinted in the environment. That is, all this emotionally charged energy is then absorbed into the surrounding environment. In this case, it would have been the soil beneath their feet. I'm talking about where I live. The trees or the air around them. This battle was mainly fought in this field. By the way, it's only 100 yards from my apartment. But I know, I can picture in my mind, these were woods at the time, and I know fleeing men from both sides were running right through the ground where I'm sitting, and blood was being shed all around where I live. It was a terribly bloody battle. But if you also take in consideration another popular topic in paranormal, at least TV, insane asylums. They seem to be quite commonly haunted, allegedly with residual energy. And there was much inhumanity, cruelty, despair, suicide, murders, etc. So the saying is that the walls of the asylum, especially if they're made of limestone, are said to be recipients and storage receptacles of this released emotional energy. Certain cues then cause the stored emotional energy to replay the event, whether it be a scream, footsteps, gunshots, certain smells, or moving apparitions, and so on. And may I interject that it's no wonder that insane asylums are especially known as haunted, because I know that at least some of these dear broken people are possessed. Some of them are in our insane asylums are possessed. So is it any wonder then that insane asylums are particularly known for their paranormal activity, demonic activity? My saying is all paranormal activity is demonic activity. That's the biblical view, and it correlates to reality. My 100 cases have borne that out in every time, every case. So, for argument's sake, suppose there is an explosion of emotionalized energy when the guns go off and the men die horrific deaths. This release of energy hits the soil or the interior walls if you're in a building. Suppose further it even penetrates the soil or the walls. The alleged result is a cluster of energy that remains intact indefinitely for decades, for centuries, according to this theory, and provides the basis for residual paranormal looking activity. Because remember, it's not paranormal. Paranormal looking activity. A cluster of energy that is sufficient enough to cause all manner of extraordinary activity, like multiple soldiers marching through the woods of Gettysburg. Sounds of guns, cannon fire, screams of the wounded, and the smell of gunpowder. All of this allegedly caused by impersonal forces of energy which have been imprinted indefinitely. In this case, for example, like with Gettysburg, 150 some years ago. My math's not too good at this, thinking on my feet or rear end, upon the environment and are playing over and over again. And it's horrific, really, that these men are in their eternal destinies. Um, and they're likewise their energy forces that have not been distributed as it is commonly thought. There's no way that a cluster of energy 100 some years ago is going to remain in the ground and then upon some cue pop up and turn in and make our most sophisticated holograms look like my 3-year-old grandson's Lego characters. There's something extremely intelligent, malevolently intelligent behind that activity. So, and this is where the residual theory slams headfirst into an absolute law of science, my friends. Any energy that was emitted by this traumatic event must must immediately begin to disperse until the equilibrium has been reached. Let me say that again. Any energy that was emitted by this traumatic event must immediately begin to disperse until equilibrium has been reached, and the energy is virtually nothing due now to how comprehensively it has been watered down. You see how comprehensively that's been watered down? That one drop? Well, this is entropy until equilibrium has been reached. Like the green drops in the glass of water, the alleged released energy must be unclustered and watered down until virtually no energy remains. But unlike the glass of water right here, the new container, if you will, is much, much, much larger. It's the soil, it's the air, the walls, and most importantly, it's the atmosphere, the air. Because really, if a person dies, their energy is not even gonna reach the walls. It disperses so immediately and so quickly. This is following along the lines, hypothetically, if there is any energy, that's leaving our body, it's going to go like that. It's not going to make a beeline for the wall as if that has a magnet to it. It's going to disperse into an atmosphere that's 100 miles wide and goes all the way around our planet. And tell me that doesn't water down energy. So, and that's going to render it virtually non-existent. So, and that meaning that the release of the alleged traumatic emotionalized energy will experience massive entropy or dispersion immediately into the air, losing any and all alleged ability to perform any functions. There is no energy remaining, kinetic or potential, so how can it do anything? Let me say it another way. The explanation for residual haunts contradicts one of the most absolute laws of science or nature. It slams headfirst into that. Now, I want to discuss something else along those lines. That why is it that people believe in this when it is on the surface, to me, so implausible? Well, sociologists speak of what is known as a plausibility structure. Without the energy remaining clusterized indefinitely, then the whole foundation for residual energy or haunt collapses, and the entire superstructure with it. Now, I'm going to say this right out. In talking about what I'm saying today, I am dismantling, we are dismantling, actually God is through his science, debunked, dismantled, destroyed, undermined the entire foundation for the notion of residual energy. You've just seen that take place by one simple illustration with water and food coloring, but mainly just by an explanation of the second and third law of thermodynamics and applying it to this particular theory of residual energy. That theory has been debunked because it doesn't fit. In fact, it's against, contrary, totally contrary to an absolute law of science. So why do people believe in it? Well, one reason is because if I've learned anything about human nature, we are loath to abandon beliefs we come to cherish, even if there is considerable evidence against it. You know, you may recall the resistance to changing from the Earth-centered solar system to the heliocentric. It took a paradigm change, which is a painful process. Sociologists refer to the paranormal community as a plausibility structure. It's much easier to hold on to an otherwise implausible belief if you have a community of folks who support each other, making it easier to believe in certain things and harder to discard them due to peer support or pressure. It is a structured community, in a sense, that enables the implausible to sound plausible within the community of the like-minded. Plausibility structures, not to mention sinful human nature and Satan, can blind even the most intelligent to the otherwise utterly obvious. And I want to tell you, friends, that to an outsider, once they get wind of something like the notion of residual energy, it really does appear implausible, to put it mildly. It's more absurd, to be more honest with you. But you see, unless there is an exterior force acting upon the alleged released energy created by the violent events or deaths, then the clusters of energy will immediately experience entropy. The same holds true of the walls of a penitentiary or asylum. Whether it's limestone, quartz, or whatever, it makes no difference. Limestone does have some interesting properties, but none that are able to conquer or circumvent thermodynamics. You know, the way that some people talk, you would think that inanimate matter has assumed human characteristics. Walls don't witness or remember anything, nor are they recording devices, because it's inanimate matter or air. Once again, no matter how much violent energy has been released within those walls, in every case the alleged energy must have dispersed immediately. It makes no difference if it's quartz or whatever. You know, some things like quartz may conduct better than some material, but it can't be stored there indefinitely. The piezoelectric properties of quartz are fascinating, but they provide nothing that can circumvent entropy or provide a mechanism for the whole alleged process. And why would energy make a beeline for the walls anyway, when the tiny amount of bioelectrical energy will most likely diffuse into the air before it even gets to the walls? One would think that these walls not only have photographic memories, but act as energy magnets as well. So whether quartz or water helps to accelerate paranormal activity, I don't know, but that's not the issue. The issue is whether any substance can retain energy in clustered form and evade entropy. And the answer to that is an emphatic no. Don't let distinct issues confuse the issue at hand. Remember, this is said to not be a paranormal issue. They consider the most powerful display the release of energy in nature, lightning. 1 billion volts in an average strike. 1 billion. I'm not sure exactly. I have a heart condition. I used to have I do have a pacemaker, and I used to have a defib as well. Now, if you combine the energy, electrical energy of the brain and the heart, it's not much voltage compared to 1 billion volts of lightning. But think what happens when lightning hits a tree in your backyard, right? How long after that 1 billion volt lightning strikes your tree, how long do you have to wait before you can touch that tree without being shocked? A minute? No, you can touch it right away. You know, the air might be ionized for a little bit, but the tree itself, and even if it was iron, it is gone. Second, third law of thermodynamics in action, y'all. Billion volts. And then we're talking about the human body. Just, just very few little voltage compared to that. And we're to think that if lightning, if that amount of energy disappears into the environment, into the air, compare the lightning strikes with the relatively tiny amount of body energy in our body. If there is a release of energy, it's gone immediately. The victim of entropy. If it happens so quickly with lightning, then how much more so with the tiny amount of electrical, chemical, thermal energy in the human body? But when a person dies, and this is vital, the energy or electrical activity of the heart and brain ceases. See, that's the definition of death, is when brain activity or the energy stops. So if that's the case, person dies, there's no energy to be released. But even if it is, just think about what we had all said about the nature of diffusion. But just a word about death. At death, the Bible says that there is separation of the soul and the body, and death is defined as a ripping asunder of the soul from the body. God owns our souls as well as our bodies, Ezekiel 18. And the soul goes immediately before God for judgment, Hebrews 9:27, and etc., etc. In addition, the soul, listen to this please, the soul is indivisible, which means that pieces of it are not going to break off and remain as so many people seem to assume. How often have you heard folks speak of pieces of persons remaining at a location? I've seen numerous episodes of the Dead Files in which Amy speaks about the fracturing of a person's personality when they died, and a certain percentage of their personality is left behind, and that is impossible according to biblical categories. The soul is the essence of a person. It is eternal and indivisible. At death, the soul departs from the body entirely intact and stands before God for judgment. Do you really think that the omnipotent, holy God, judge of heaven and earth, will let 5% of our souls to remain and evade his eternal sentence? No. The fracturing or disintegration of our souls after death is impossible in light of all God says about himself, ourselves, death, and eternal judgment. Somebody with a mind towards the psychologizing of the paranormal made this insane concept up. Now remember, energy is energy. We need to stop anthropomorphizing it, giving it human or personal traits. There are 6 known forms of energy, well, actually more, but main forms are chemical, electrical, radiant, mechanical, nuclear, and thermal energies. None of those can do what people want it to do as far as the residual energy. Unless you create a different category of energy unknown to science, then this energy must be inanimate and obey the law of entropy and quickly diffuse into equilibrium. Nobody has yet to explain how residual energy can evade the absolute laws of thermodynamics. Indeed, they can't. They cannot. And residual energy has created unnecessarily complicatedness in light of the Bible's simple symmetry regarding the afterlife. The one thing I would reiterate and end is that entropy of released energy is immediate and quick, much quicker than the food coloring analogy. It's totally done. Now, science tells us that the foundation for the theory of residual haunt is contradictory to an absolute law of science. Energy cannot be destroyed, but it also cannot remain clustered, no matter what the substance or the circumstances, period. The foundation for residual energy and haunts has been debunked, demolished, destroyed, deconstructed, and thrown in the trash bin where it belongs. All that remains is an ash heap of a worthless anti-scientific theory. And if you think I'm agitated, I am. It's because of the damage that it has done to poor clients who, as I said at the outset, at least at the beginning, had a healthy concern. But now, because of being told they have a living museum, have a false sense of hope. They have the demonic in their presence, and they're being told it's non-intelligent residual energy. Yeah, I should be upset, and so should you. So, that's why I'm being so emphatic. I've had 100 cases. Many of those people thought it was a residual energy, but by the time this non-intelligent energy was confronted, they became very intelligent, and the name of Jesus has a powerful way of getting rid of residual energy, that is, demonic entities. I want to thank you for hanging with me in this important episode or segment on residual energy and thermodynamics. I would ask that you please share it. It needs to be shared. So I appreciate it. Thank you very much.